Yeah, it's kind of like thinking about, General Motors Acceptance Corporation, the acceptance speech of the century, and a different viewpoint, based upon, linguistic alphanumerics. But the thing with this is that it seemed to be that I've been kind of like thinking about, the Israeli alphanumerics of 73, Harris, and Egypt, and Israeli, and then, the thing about the I on the back side, and everyone knows there's two, like pi r squared, E equal MC squared. At the same time, it's like monetary and domestic suppression and loss prevention. It seemed to be that ultimately the Star of David, the Israeli flag, is presenting the two triangles as a 6-point star, yet 6-point, it's like 138, and like Donald Trump did, it presents the horizontal parameters. And I think, you've heard that math is power on television probably many times in the 80s about, the commercial, that math is power. The thing with this is that it seemed that the Israeli flag, the Star of David, is representing like two delta forces. And it seemed to be the thing about the Amazon, in Latin terminology, in the book Secrets of the Temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, and the misappropriation allocates to the Mississippi, and the electronic schematic of the triangle representing the delta force. The thing of it is that monetary and domestic aggregates of neighborhoods seems to be the thing that seems to be quite a bit about it. And the information in the book Secrets of the Temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, identifying the history of the U.S. dollar below the equator in Latin America is the thing. And it seemed to be, the color code, of President Barack Obama referring to certain information that is a practical application of principle, yet a transition based upon academics and going a little bit beyond the thought of like a religious thing about, a baptism and, the death, resurrection, and like the Mount Olive thing about, on a plateau, what a plateau is, as compared to like a summit, and where that's at. The thing with this is that ultimately it seems to be presenting, the plateau as like the mediation between like the parameters, what would be like normally absolute value at a vertical level, and live auditing in quantum is vertical, as compared to like post-production involving editing, customizing waveform. And the Israeli flag presents those horizontal parameters of a 6-point star, yet it seems to be the thing about, misappropriation allocation to the Mississippi and the biggest mouth of the river, and two electronic schematic symbols representing the delta, the biggest mouth of the river, and, the thing about, what is seemingly involving the thought of redundant frequency or a grid within signal strength. It seems to be the thing about the Internet Protocol of Local Area Network of Maritime Law. And the thing of this is that the Star of David, it seems to be, the Star of David representing the Israeli flag. And it seemed to be that monetary and domestic is representing, the alphanumerics of like Harris being 73 in Egypt and Israeli. Yet the Secrets of the Temple presents it below the equator in that sense of like the categorization of money identifying the U.S. dollar in a book during the Ronald Reagan administration, the New York Federal Reserve Bank President Paul Volcker, and him actually assigning, and Ronald Reagan assigning him, I think it was two places of like an economic advisor and a Secretary of Treasury. Yet Robert E. Rubin seems to be, the thing about, the daily standard transaction and like the current event of an endorsement, the current event of participation, almost like a separation between church and state at the same time. Yet McDonald's Golden Arches is presenting both half cycles above what would be like a center line of oscillation of the equator or operator. And it ultimately gets to the alphanumerics of 108 of, like operator being 108 or Chevrolet, or even the thing about a bicentennial issue, and or zero, ultimately, being the thing about, even Zion, zero being the alphanumerics of 64, the thing about the operator, and American, and music minus A, and HTTP colon. And the thing with this is that it gets to the word relation between the HTTP colon, the ratio // and the colon // and it seemed to present the symmetrical, asymmetrical thing about even in anatomy that way, and a misappropriation allocation to the Mississippi, based upon information right now seems to be that the memory minus the fact, though, seemed to be when it became an extremely huge thing about memory, going through the Stargate program and knowing a period had taken place, and still thought there wasn't an issue with memory. I wasn't even even thinking about the thing with it is that when I came to that realization, I realized that possibly an entire year of some extremely serious stuff like going on like during what would be the 1994, 95, and 96, and potentially an entire year, without a doubt, 6 to 9 month period, and something in my mind about Geneva, Switzerland, and Univision presenting 3 pastels in black and 3 pastels in white, seemingly something in my mind of like the BN venue in Geneva, Switzerland, presenting the idea of the summit meetings as neutrality. Summit meetings in like Geneva, Switzerland has presented many types of, I don't know if I'd really call it a convention or a place of neutrality that would be something maybe other than, the thought of like UN sanctions or NATO peace treaty as compared to the North American Free Trade Act. And it seems to be the thing about like what's going on in my mind right now about, the Star of David being a 6-point star, being alphanumeric 138, or, the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, or the alphanumeric 138, like a telepathic angel and everything, like a telepathic mediation in the sky and a symbolic representation on the backside of the U.S. $1 bill, representative in that way. But the thing with this is that right now it seems to be that the information that Barack Obama had presented as involving Al Qaeda and the misappropriation allocation, and ultimately even the secrets of the hypothesis that runs the country in the history of the U.S. dollar, and the one cycle of frequency above the letter N in Latin terminology, and that pronunciation of the NYA, the nya, like in the name Pena, and it being applied to like OSHA. Yet the thing with this is that it gets to a vice president network in that way, and a biblical scripture in my mind that seems to be the thing about, importing and exporting, or, on the front lines of the beach run, or, internet protocol of a local area network of maritime law, and SAN software at the front lines of the beach run, like a vice president network of multiple, international banking systems, and multinational jurisdictions of like corporate participating factors involving importing and exporting, and what protected U.S. patents is in that way, or the thought of even, distinguishing the difference between human capital as compared to the idea of like degreed, non-degreed, or, the practical application of McDonald's golden arches being like a degree level of ripple standards of consensual participation in both half cycles, being representative of that compatibility of like a degree level of reputable standards of consensual participation as compared to the frequency being half above and half below, with a center line of oscillation yet at a 90-degree, and it becoming side by side, the practical application of McDonald's golden arches, and being side by side, it looks like the electronic schematic fish, a symbolic representation of Christianity that many Christians actually put on their car. Similar to that, you've seen like the ribbon of like a soldier, I think it's a categorization normally involving charitable causes. Excuse me. Yet the electronic schematic fish is a Christian type of a symbolic representation representing Christianity, and it looks like both half cycles, half above, half below, side by side, looking like the electronic schematic fish. And the thing about it is, at a 90-degree, and it being going upward like the fish swimming upstream, is the thing about, the ladder. And coordinates with like the equator being at a 90-degree, it'd be like G was hoping for a Longines, and it'll always be the thing about the equator at a 90-degree being the 10 degree in my mind at a 90 that way. But G was hoping for a Longines, and it's like, well, how about that Jehovah's Witness Watchtower? And it seemed to be that all that information about just a little bit of humor about that leads to what a carbon footprint is. It seemed to be that the Bureau of Vital Statistics birth certificate of the footprint. Seemingly, a projected estimate of like a biometric principle of like a carbon footprint and absentee voting of like a vice president network. Yet it seems to be that the 6-point star of Israel is presenting the parameters at a horizontal level, not necessarily the absolute thing about, you know, the absolute salute and proper English numerical composition or degree definition of intended use as compared to like linguistic alphanumerics is quite a bit about, you know, the pronunciation and practical application of principle, more so at first. And it seemed to be, you know, based upon, you know, more so of like the pi r squared and E equal MC squared, getting into what practical application of pronunciation of principle is, into the thing about exponential quotients of power multiplication, and where the word is really at as compared to the distinguishable difference between linguistic alphanumerics as pronunciation as compared to a degree definition of intended use. But it seemed to be like, you know, the Israeli flag representing the two delta forces, the two, if you want to call it Oldsmobile Delta, Oldsmobile Delta 88, okay? And it seemed to be that the Oldsmobile Delta 88 represents the alphanumerics of 88, or the Roosevelt New Deal Act being like 88, or purple, or Trump. And 88, you know, as a pi r square would be like something like, it would be representative, and I don't want to call it like an issue of EPA, or, you know, an emissions test of like air quality, but, you know, the big formula 44 and all the practical application, or even the humorous bones seemingly ultimately getting to informational world news of the spore stone being used in orthopedic surgery. And it seemed to be, I mean, so pi r squared E equal MC squared and big formula 44, yet at the same time, it's almost like comparable reference to like root 66. I mean, in that way, and the FDIC and the thing about, you know, 44 and being like a word hidden in my mind, it's an automatic connection in my mind involving like escrow, an FBI miracle, a hard guide, and ultimately leads to a bunch of alphanumerics in that way. And it seemed to be that the same thing, you know, the word oath, excuse me, and the word hidden, inadvertently seemed to be the thing about, you know, escrow. And it seemed to be the thing about, you know, 44 and 22, and ultimately, you know, the 22 alphabetical letters of Japanese, it seemed to be, and linking like Diners Club to the thing about quantum, and just a 90-degree representative between reading English from left to right and reading Japanese from top to bottom. It's like the Diners Club symbolic representation with a circle and line at it at a 90-degree, and it like presents the idea of like schematic, electronic, symbolic and analytical practical application of like just the symbolic representation, identifying, you know, the difference between suppression and loss prevention as neighborhoods is like monetary and domestic as compared to what is automatically in my mind now, and really what I'm like really wanting to like really have in everything about it. It's like a commercial venue of living quarters, not considered a neighborhood, not affected by television programming. And it seemed to be the Star of David, like the Israeli flag, is really, you know, like an issue like right now. And it seemed to be whether or not if auditing legal media as compared to deposition, you know, you've heard the Washington Post many times, the initials WP. It's like legal media and deposition, the Washington Post. It seems the difference between like live on air or auditing live on air as compared to the thought of like post-production involving editing. Although deposition almost in pronunciation presents post-production that's defined as a legal, you know, like MP4 format video, that's not supposed to be any idea of like editing, yet it presents it by its practical application based upon pronunciation of its word itself, deposition, as after the fact. And normally post-production involving after the fact is normally the idea of editing. It's kind of like, you know, the same sort, you know, difference between, you know, knowing the when and where, or the thought of like constitutional law presented as non-degree, non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization, as intellectual, having, you know, fair use of like an easement, but not claiming the ownership of the rights. And that seemed to be so the thing about, you know, the the Delta Force and suppression and like loss prevention, like right now, it's kind of like it seemed to be the thing that the information that Barack Obama presented as involving Al Qaeda and his words that he chose as him trying to demonize. The thing of it is that the same information in the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, identifying the history of the U.S. dollar, is pretty much close to the same thing involving the word mammon. Although it seemed to be the book involving quite a bit about television programming, and even during the Jimmy Carter administration, ultimately resulting in a movie like Black Hawk Down. It's a situation, and even previously, I mean, the miniseries of like WadeASVPriddy, the similarities of a television program during the 1972, I think. It was like a miniseries. WadeASVPriddy. The thing of it is that, you know, all the factors going on, it seemed to be that television programming presenting a deed restriction as some idea of like a auditing legal media as compared to the thought of like the memory minus de facto being 35, or NASA, National Aeronautics Space Administration, or the thought of like Austin Powers and the Blue Bonnet Imperial Eagle and all the color codes that seem to be, you know, linking, you know, the idea of the Israeli bird. It is one bird, blue and purple, and is one bird, blue and purple. And yeah, really cool looking bird for real. In any case, so like you know, it presents all that information, and you know, the kingsmanship as like a moat around the kingsmanship, representing some idea, the kingsmanship being some idea of like jurisdictional issues that would be maybe categorized as, you know, something during the English Parliament as King Henry VIII, you know, and the alphanumerics of 36 being 8, and the number 8 and TH being like the alphanumerics of 36, chasing oil, or, you know, the GIT, Geospatial Information Technology. Henry VIII, and the thing about the turkey leg, and you know, quite a bit about, you know, Elizabeth, and I'm not going to go off into that direction like right now, but the whole thing about, in my mind, as compared from like jurisprudence, which is the pastel green with the black back, in my mind is the only thought of one word of warehousing and, you know, state statutes annotated, linking the idea of deed restrictions of television programming to like real estate as a non-degreed issue. And it seemed to be the non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization of like a bunch of non-degreed situations. Even degreed, that hasn't like, you know, made a grade beyond, you know, the thought of like just being in the neighborhood, I mean, for real. And my thought about, you know, the way I've been led to believe, like, hey, I'm an American, like, I think really, you know, just because a person has a birth certificate, you know, in my early years, was just the automatic assumption that, you know, hey, like, I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm American, and wasn't really a question of whether or not that practicing the idea of, like, electronic power being alphanumerics of, like, 181, Houston, Texas, we International of Warner, Electra and Atlantic, or what a circuit is, just, you know, based upon what a television is in a person's home, of like predominantly, you know, like more so of K television, that seemed to be the whole entire point, as compared to like some idea of like what seemed to be the thing about jurisprudence with the black back of what seemed to be the idea of like state statutes annotated as like Fox 29 News in Philadelphia, linking the thing about the jurisprudence and the black back, and like an entire black nation, involving, you know, thought of like litigation de facto writ habeas corpus, or loss prevention in the form of like suppression. The thing about being in the bank is that ultimately, you know, it gets to, you know, the idea that in someone's placement, that Grover Cleveland on the U.S. $1,000 bill, like in my mind now, the thing is, it's like the idea of like investment terminology where human capital seems to be, whether it's an academic or an experience going through the circuit, and just seems to be the thing about just really knowing the thing about human capital investment terminology, and like just like the Mormon Church and like Zion National Park and 1,000 Years of Peace, and knowing all that, it seems to be the deal about whether or not if litigation de facto writ habeas corpus is only defining the meaning of lifespan, and like I'm trying to find a more productive, positive direction, not necessarily the contesting factor, which seemed to be like the PG-13 rating, and the PG being like the alphanumerics of what I think is 23, and the CEO, corporate executive officer, or the thing about the alphanumerics of like 23, and the letter G that's not in the word being in Geneva, Switzerland, as human civil rights, and it ultimately seems to be a distinguishable factor of like going through a circuit, including and on the Bluebird bus, but it seemed to be, like Judy Garland and the Wizard of Oz, somewhere over the rainbow bluebirds fly, and even linking some idea of what biometrics is beyond into like a bunch of white stuff, invisible programming, and light scribe that way. The thing with this is that right now it seems to be the Star of David, even the Israeli embassy. The Israeli embassy, like in the Houston, Texas area, is in like the Greenway Plaza area, not far from what is now Lakewood Church. Previously, in the beginning, like the Summit, where like a bunch of concerts, were of a lot of bands from around the entire English-speaking world. The thing with this is that it turned into like compact center of the Houston Rockets, and now Lakewood Church, all at the same location in the Wesleyan area, in the Greenway Plaza area, not far from the Israeli embassy. But the thing about what I was referring to involving like world class, it's like the pastel colors of like night vision measured in nano, the density being measured in nanoluminance is the thing about night vision. And my thing about even the Israeli embassy and the color of the glass, and it seemed to be the pastel green and the pastel red of like on the 13-band graphic equalizer, or the idea of a PG-13 rating, and even 13 being, alphanumerically like alphanumerics of 99, or telepathic, or the TP thing right back to the alphanumerics of 36. In any case, so like the Israeli embassy presenting, itself in the Greenway Plaza, in my mind, a pastel green, the similarities of one of the pastels of like, I like the Sprite in you, even, British Petroleum, even Mountain Dew, and like the connectivity of the two pastels, and like even jurisprudence, in the law library with the black back, and the colors, of province identified as world class in world history during the 200-year celebration of America, during a little before, during, and after. Think about Richard Nixon in 1976. And the thing about the 200-year celebration of bicentennial quarter, even identifying 200 as like a 200-mile protected waters around the United States, and some idea of the scale and colon double force slash compared to ratio, and it's almost like like a moat around the kingsmanship, representing the idea of jurisdictions as a kingsmanship, as like the English Parliament of the colors of a golf course, okay, and the jurisprudence that it identifies it as English. It is almost like proper English grammatical composition of the P being pronounced and the P being visible and silent. It's almost like, for real, like, Bill Hurd Chevrolet and like a Landmark Chevrolet. It's just like proper English grammatical composition of the P being visible and pronounced and the P being visible and silenced. It's like Bill Hurd Chevrolet, for real. And like Landmark Chevrolet. So like it's unreal. It's almost like the E equal MC squared and the pi r squared, almost immediately in the Houston, Texas area. Yet the exponential quotients of powers of multiplication seem to be the deal. Like right now, distinguishing the difference of what the Israeli flag and two triangles representing two delta forces, like the Big Mouth River, and the electronic schematic symbol of the triangle representing the delta, and the electronic schematic symbol is the triangle for the delta. Yet Oldsmobile Delta 88 has the connectivity of like California being 88, and the whole idea of like the Mormon, yet Mormon is so Utah, it's unreal. Yet Zion National Park presents, Zion, that's like some heaven on earth idea of 1,000 years of peace. Yet, it seemed to be the thing of what litigation de facto res habeas corpus is, like even the Charles Bach statement that in my mind, that when he says anything less would be uncivilized, is ultimately, in my mind, him referring to, a commercial venue of living quarters that's considered not a neighborhood. as compared to like any neighborhood. It seemed to be the thing about litigation, de facto, res habeas corpus, and like what's going on right now about the Israeli flag and the Star of David, and two triangles and information that sticks to the tip of the Reserve runs the country, and the history of the U.S. dollar below the equator involving Latin terminology, and linking the cycle per second above the letter N in Latin terminology and in language applied to, you know, like the acronym OSHA. And it presents the VPN as like, you know, importing and exporting, and even a principle of like Jesus said he knew before the foundations of the earth, and it seemed to be the importing and exporting factor of even, you know, a vice president network involving immigration custom enforcement, and different banking systems as a categorization of money, or even a name as a categorization, and what an intellectual easement is as non-degreed, as non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization as compared to a degree of intended use, or the thing about McDonald's golden arches being the degree level or reputable standards of consensual participation applied to that one cycle of frequency that's like over the letter N in Latin terminology. It's like it identifies like a redundant frequency, and I'm not real clear on everything about it, but it seemed to be the issue of like boycott and embargo and the clearance issue that distinguishes the difference between maritime law and aviation, and like National Aeronautic Space Administration, and like beyond internet protocol of local area network, a maritime law, and not the issue of like, you know, importing and exporting, or a carbon footprint, or absentee voting, and you know, the who knows anyway form, or the thought of like not even knowing it being used in a way. It's only like, you know, trading energy in the North American Free Trade Act. There's some idea, you know, that goes beyond, you know, thought of like even NATO, the North Atlantic Treaties Organization, but I've seen it with and without the P, of like North Atlantic Peace Treaties Organization. And the thing about that one word peace seems to be the Grover Cleveland thing about Zion, the alphanumeric is 64, and HTTP : and the difference between K television and W television, presenting litigation de facto res habeas corpus as a deed restriction or a mechanics lien, or, you know, hey, you know, being led to believe in constitutional law has been a result of, you know, just following advertisement on television. And it seemed to be an ongoing issue of like, you know, television programming, identifying whether or not of a deed restriction. It's just like, you know, a national security issue. And, you know, like I'm trying to like get all over on that. And get the commercial venue of living quarters, you know, for myself about everything that I'm about, involving audio production, concert, you know, really touring. You know, I said like I was born in August 6, 1964, and I said I was 60. I'm actually 61 now. Okay, I mean, this is what, August like 2025, but yeah, yes, I'm actually 61. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, by the way, yeah. And so like anyway, so like I'm 61. Yeah, all right. Yeah, so like you know, and it's kind of like going on, you know, and it seemed to be like really whether or not the idea of access has really presented the thought of like, you know, thing about, you know, it seemed to be the forecast of like we international and selective service involving, you know, the humorous bone, okay? And I'm not going to get off into that like all like right now, but I'm like really kind of like concentrated on the Israeli flag and the two triangles being like the idea of like Oldsmobile Delta 88, and what 88 and 88 is to Highway 288 right here in Pearland, Texas, and the alphanumerics of 88 of Trump, and really if it's the issue of like Vladimir Putin and Vladimir and Trump being the thing about, you know, 88 and 88, and, you know, like South Freeway, previously Nolan Ryan Express, Highway 288, identifies as South Freeway now, but Nolan Ryan is automatically the thing about California and California Angels and the 88 thing, and so very much about, you know, the Houston Astros and California Angels and Texas Rangers, and what the Texas Rangers seem to be, you know, in my mind, you know, the Delta Force in a way of like whether or not if the aggregate's monetary and domestic is only the idea of the information represented below the equator that Barack Obama presented as Al-Qaeda, as comparable reference to practical application of identifying how the U.S. dollar, the history of the U.S. dollar is described in the book, Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country. Yeah, all that information, it presents, you know, I mean, something, you know, almost all in a religious way. I mean, it seemed to be the Baptists. I mean, so for real, yet what its practical application of principle is, representing the idea of the death, resurrection, and returning to heaven. Ultimately, the one word transfiguration on the plateau in the book of Thessalonians being the thing about, the transfiguration and ascending, from Mount Olives into the sky, and back into heaven. So, like this is really my first time to do this, okay? So, like trying to get it going on that way, okay? But really, in any case, I'm not really trying to find humor in it, although I could if I wanted to. And I'm really thinking that, I guess I might maybe be a little careful about that. But anyway, so like in any case, so I'm thinking about that because it seemed to be presenting the idea of Highway 288, or the Oldsmobile Delta 88, or the idea of like something beyond the alphanumerics of 69, Texas, Mexico, and the thing below the equator called the Mammon. Yet the thing about Jehovah and Texas that way, yet it presents the same idea of region 0. Although the alphanumerics presented as 69 looks like there's equality, but anyone who knows like anything about the algebraic test of inversion and applying that normally of like algebra to like alphanumeric linguistics, it presents the does or does not equal issue at the same time. Now it seems to be the experience of a circuit that represents the does or does not equal in the American Heart and Lung Association of that symbolic representation of like, two horizontal lines with like, a line going through it. So like automatically, based upon my experience, I automatically like really seriously beyond like not cool right now, okay? So like in any case, so like I'm kind of like thinking about that and what that symbolic representation looks like. National Aeronautics Space Administration, and some idea, that monetary and domestic of neighborhoods is the thing, and the commercial venue of living quarters seem to be, ultimately, the exponential quotients of powers of multiplication. Somewhere in my mind, like the protection of like tariff in a way of like a protected U.S. patent, and the idea of like annuity, or electronic power, beyond the thought of any method of banking, or some idea of investment terminology of human capital, going beyond the thought of like any paper that somehow in a lot of people's minds represent either a settlement of insurance or an adjustment or a claim, or the idea of a FDIC claim as only what de facto means between litigation and writ habeas corpus based upon television programming, or even if any participating factors knows anything about quantum and like live auditing of the vertical parameters of the absolute salute, the absolute values of the absolute salute in military, and those are presented in like algebra going through calculus as, the two vertical lines is the absolute value, yet not taught in any kind of way involving the word attenuation, or the thought of like the UA and the word attenuation being the alphanumerics of like 21 and 1 being 22, and the FDIC and RCA, ultimately, the 22 letters of Japanese language, and like National Aeronautics Space Administration, that movie, you have all the right stuff, yeah. And it seemed to be the deal between whether or not if the horizontal plane horizon is only representing domestic and monetary as aggregates, as English reading from left to right, as compared to reading Japanese from top to bottom. And the idea of like exponential quotients of power multiplication, only because auditing live legal media is involving like live on air, like idea of like quantum and waveform to the max, not a question of editing, as vertical like live on air auditing, as compared to the thought of like what seemed to be really kind of like the issue, and that's why I'm like really kind of like working on it, and through all this like idea of like suppression and loss prevention, it's kind of like now like you need like a hair transplant, so like like real hair, like the Bosley thing in my entire mouth though, with like dental implants, I mean for real, and the thought of like litigation and de facto is like only the thought of like loss prevention and suppression is contesting factors of the idea of whether or not if censorship is the only thought of whether or not if the idea of access is the only idea of a degree level or having fair use of intellectual property as as maybe non-negotiable non-transferable itemization as a foreknowledge of performance monitoring, not identified as investment terminology or like even human capital. So it's really getting to the whole idea of the thought of whether or not if only what a neighborhood is identified as. I'm not even sure that I've heard anything representative of any civic club or anything about any neighborhood representing some idea of what is like charter district and zone or segregated factors that would place a meaning and value as maybe more so departmental as compared to at random employment. More so it seems to be like sometimes chartering, districting, and zoning on some neighborhoods that identify what a lot of people believe is like subdivisions. In some places of some type of neighborhood isn't a subdivision, at all. Although it is a principle of that practical application, or the difference between urban and suburban. It's all, really, the whole thought of like, you've heard it before. It's like some idea of like grandfathered corporate laws, retroactive presidential administration, and someone else previously in another generation said, well, I just didn't know any better. Oh, it's not that again, is it? Well, anyway, I can't even say that kind of. So get well soon. Yeah. So like anyway, so like I was wanting to think about that because it seems to be like right now that Al Qaeda and pronunciation can be the thought of the misappropriation of allocation. Allocation seemed to be about the thing about Al Qaeda and allocation. Even Rush Limbaugh presenting the idea of what he always used to talk about on his talk show is America and OK. And it seemed that now, it seems somewhere in my mind, the Lockheed Martin and the eccentric triangle thing, that Rush Limbaugh referring to America as like Rampart Emergency 51, and Lockheed Martin and the eccentric triangle, and the thing about even the dolphin on the Atlantic side, and ultimately even the wall of a structure of state, federal, local authorities, ultimately, the accommodations, like Bedrock and Fred Flintstone, for real. But the thing with this is that it presents that structure as symmetrical, asymmetrical, and the HTTP : // and knowing its structure and design is just symmetrical, asymmetrical, back to back, about the : / as compared to, like, are you dyslexic, and the thing about, relation, and the thing about the ratio, // and all that stuff about Austin Powers, Blue Bonnet, and Paralegal. But anyway, it's like kind of like thinking about that right now because it seems to be kind of like where it's at and what the 90 degree of the one frequency that's identified based upon categorization as something like maybe religiously not considered cool, or like, well, who else is going to do it? The thing of it is that, and like do what? Who else is going to like? Who do what? But anyway, yeah, so like in any case, so like it seems to be ultimately, thing that academics provides as some idea as a religious principle of, like a baptism, yet at the same time, like the real thing, of like, the death, resurrection, and returning and re-entering the heaven thing about, the plateau. Mount Olives is a plateau. Some people's mind might not automatically associate it with like Robert Half or, the difference between pi r squared and like Geneva, Switzerland of a summit meeting. Or some like, plane horizon of an altimeter in aeronautics, or some like idea of equilibrium of centrifugal force, or G-force is what it's called in aviation. Although it is a type of centrifugal force, but more so of like pilots and, training for like astronauts, more so centrifugal of like astronauts as compared to like G-force of pilots in aviation. Yet based upon, I guess if it's going to be the thought of inertia, and I think that's kind of like the easement between, centrifugal and like the G-forces. I think it's the inertia. In any case, so like I was thinking about that, but anyway, yeah. So like I'm thinking about all that because it seems to be like right now, I'm trying to like really, like hey, like Airmark Arena's the maximum seating capacity of like 26,000 in indoor arena, like for entertainment, because I thought of like We International, Houston, Texas Electronic Power, and Selective Services. Well, I'm kind of like in the mood for like everyone to do that and like do it on Highway 288, okay? Yeah, really. So like, I'm still like thinking about a commercial venue of living quarters, and I mean getting all that in the Hill HX50, because my thought of suppression and loss prevention involving all this stuff and going through a Stargate program and so many things has happened, it's not my idea of like it going like on again, because some idea of like an Israeli flag, we're saying 2 triangles is 2 Delta forces, and some idea of suppression and loss prevention like all over again, because I'm not like really in the mood for like that all over again kind of crap, okay? Really at all. The thing with it is that really, the thought of suppression and loss prevention as some idea, as censorship or a national security issue. Well, what's a real national security issue? I mean, is it like a religious separation between church and state, or maybe not, or is it the who knows anyway for him? Because I mean, it's ultimately getting to the point of like knowing or not knowing. It's really, and all that talk about, like parental guidance, throwing that, terminology is like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, I think that it is what everyone knows, and what, everyone who knows who, with what everyone has thought of what, is involving, their specific direction. I don't think it's just an at random of like a bunch of people that like don't know anything. What a circuit is kind of like, it's almost like so not taught sometimes. It seems to be how economics seems to identify, what availability only means involving importing and exporting, and it seems the difference between corporate law and business law. And corporate law being the thing about the eccentric triangle on the plane horizon as compared to business law, it seems to be the only thing about the frequency of business law. It involves like the pie chart, yet the frequency of half cycle above with the center line of oscillation at a 90 presenting, the circle with a dot in it, or, the pie chart. I mean, for real, even the euro dollar seems to be a factor of the pie chart. Even a 90 degree of the Diners Club symbolic representation with like the circle with the line at a 90 degree. And it seems to be the Diners Club thing that distinguishes the difference between the alphanumerics, which seems to be the main minimum requirement, and max, an only difference of 1 from 58 to 59. And seeing all that, and the same, the thing about Diners Club symbolic representation of like a circle with 1 vertical line and at a 90, I mean, it presents everything that seems to be, I mean, so symbolic and analytically significant as far as like the 23 thing about sigma alpha delta kappa phi, and the 23 English alphabetical letters of the 4 acronyms with 5 letters, and the 1 3-letter acronym with a total of like 23 English alphabetical letters, sigma alpha delta kappa phi. And what that is to Dr. Pepper, or the 23 thing, or corporate executive officer, and the thing about the PG-13 rating, ultimately PG is 16 and 7, is ultimately 23, and the difference between like the symbolic representation on the backside of the US $1 bill being it's like the one and only mandatory minimum requirement, and ultimately it's only a difference of 1. It seems to be, since quantum had been the issue, what would have been just a simple alphanumeric value at a vertical norm, being vertical, became the issue of like Japanese being 71 in Pearland, and quantum and 2 symbolic structures identifying a different by design E recognized in calculus, but in quantum it's like that different design E. It's almost like the EE representing the excellence of like compatibility of McDonald's Golden Arches, a degree level of reputable standards, and a progression of the frequency half above below becoming some idea of productivity as a demanded requirement, and recognized as the idea of compatibility in relation, yet fertility, and involving even the thought of like the Big Mouth of the river and the delta force, and some idea of the affirmative fallopian tube. And what relation, I mean relation is, I mean the real word about, between architecture and platform. I mean, you can simply and easily place in the mind the equator as 0 degrees, or the one and only latitude, and how that's significance at a 90 degree presents, above the equator. All the information below the equator is really presenting an issue that seems to be, not necessarily the idea of like, a degree level rep or standards of consensual participation, like McDonald's Golden Arches, or the thought of like being baptized during, the gold rush and on the Wells Fargo, stagecoach, and, identifying like, Wyatt Earp and, John Wayne, and what, true good is to the writ habeas corpus, or even Pepe, a European and I'm a European thing. It seemed to be like the PPI and the PPO and the HMO of John Wayne and that little Mexican guy, Pepe. It's really about the two ends. It seemed to be, distinction would only be alphanumeric equivalents of 69 between Texas and Mexico, ultimately even below the equator, the Mammon. But that's not really identified in any John Wayne movie as that below the equator. Pepe, with that one cycle of frequency above the letter N, identifying Latin terminology, but the frequency seemed to be of the neighborhood, applied to the OSHA, the European and the HMO of the euro dollar in proper English numerical composition, linguistic alphanumerics, will ultimately identify the PPI, the Mississippi, as the most appropriation allocation of the Mississippi, and the SSI and the ISS, and the ISS being like an international superstar, international space station, or the SSI is like supplemental security or superstar intelligence, and ultimately the PPI getting to the PPO and the HMO, and it all gets to the euro dollar, and principal, I mean like a John Wayne, ultimately Richard habeas corpus and true grit, and like Pepe and the European and I'm a European thing about neighborhoods is ultimately what Pepe in my mind is, as compared to Hopsing, and Hopsing's in between like John Wayne and Wyatt Earp, and the thing about being amphibious based upon pronunciation of the walk, or what the jaywalk is considered, but it's not the jaywalk. It's like a Japanese, Chinese, Oriental walk of like stir fry of the chef, but in pronunciation it's like it seemed to be going so much with that Better Business Bureau bird bat baptism, and what Route 66 seemed to identify of Vice President networks squared of 6 being 6. Yet, the acronym BBB of Better Business Bureau and the BBB of bird bat baptism, and all the alphanumerics seem to involve like, MGM, bird name, all the alphanumerics are 33 and all that stuff. But anyway, yeah, so like it's already going on like 47 minutes and like 57 seconds. 47 minutes and now it's 48 minutes, yeah. So like anyway, so like I was wanting to keep that in mind because I'm trying to think about, the Israeli flag, like where it's at like right now, with something about memory minus de facto being like National Aeronautics Space Administration here in Pearland, Texas. This is the year 2025, okay? It's August, like right now. And all the idea of Pearland being, the alphanumerics of like 140, and it seemed to be the thing about, the color code between like Los Angeles all the way to like, Miami, involving that 1 degree, ultimately, the Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi of the International Electrical Electronic Engineering, and some idea of the Roosevelt New Deal Act involving, the International Electrical Electronic Engineering, and the thing about OPEC and energy. A whole bunch of color codes that way. Even the Ryan performance monitoring. And all this, can go on and on and on about, the way I really think about it. And it seemed to be really, even Pepe and the thing about Hopsing, and that one cycle above the letter N in Latin terminology applied to the principle of like the OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, to the reference that Barack Obama gave of Al-Qaeda becoming the idea of Al-Qaeda being the allocation, and Rush Limbaugh referring to like America in my mind is like the Lockheed Martin, eccentric triangle of, the exit ramp, and yet the two arrows of Lockheed Martin, and, whether or not if it's a solid or haloed version of like Star Trek, the eccentric triangle represented like on the Atlantic side is like the Bermuda Triangle, but on a scale reference, it seemed to be like the telepathic blue print on the wall, even involving the television series. I mean, Leave Without a Trace. I mean, looking at the wall and just deciding to trace, like, my own work. And I'm kind of like looking at it and kind of like, what am I doing? But immediately when it got to like a bunch of calculated alignments, only just like using a legal pad and the edge and like a paper-made pen, not even calibrating, doing any math work. I mean it all. It just looked that calibrated that it would just automatically be using each other progressively, each line as a point of origin, as a reference, and doing it. I mean, only that way became 5 eccentric triangles overlapping each other, and like 3 lines of the 5 triangles intersecting and becoming the 323, like an area code of Los Angeles, as compared to Lockheed Martin being a 232 of the 2 Earth lines and 3 intersecting axes. That's compared to the 3 lines being at 1 intersecting axis. And it's like, the difference between Lockheed Martin and a 232 and a 323 of like a Los Angeles area code of, 213 and 323. And the whole idea of like, telepathic blueprint on the wall. And I mean, but anyway, yeah, so like I'm already getting ready to take a break. I mean, for real, but yeah, it seemed to be like that Al-Qaeda been the allocation, and Rush Limbaugh referring to America and like okay, it seemed to be the thing about the occasion, the okay, instead of the C having pronunciation of a K, having a pronunciation would normally be a lot of times, more so than not, maybe of the Tion of the shun, as compared to the Cian, and allocation becoming the allocation and the occasion and the ultimate the ocean, in the same principle of the letter N in Latin terminology, with half a cycle above is 1 frequency above the letter N applied to the acronym OSHA, identifying vice president networks and importing, exporting, and immigration custom enforcement, like a practical application of principles like Lord Jesus Christ said He knew you before the foundations of the earth. I mean, it's so like very simple at the front lines of the beach, right? In international financial management of SAN software, it's unreal. Even the idea of Cybell in my mind involving like the Oracle Corporation, it seems to link the Arabic to some idea of like Barack Obama's statement of like Oracle Corporation, and the Cybell seem to be the thing, ultimately a baptism of like Southwestern Bell, reach out and touch someone. I mean, so for real, I mean, Flag Day, June 14th, 1992, at the Mormon Church of Friendswood, Texas. And Cybell of Oracle is kind of like it's linking in my mind the Barack Obama's reference of like Al-Qaeda in the Persian Gulf, yet the principle of the US $1 described in the Secrets of the Temple as Latin terminology of Amazon, yet the Nile and Euphrates of what seems to be Cybell of Oracle Corporation, presenting Arabic and all that information involving like the dolphin and my friend Flicka and all that, linguistic, that people probably don't even recognize that a lot of the time when people start talking, like, hey, flick my beck in a commercial, a lot of people probably don't even like automatically think of Arabic or Cybell or Oracle Corporation, but it seemed to be that information involving importing and exporting, I mean that way, that identifies the difference between like free enterprise. Is the thing about Oracle is enterprise management, and free enterprise, it's like it has a whole new perception of human capital in Zion and 1,000 years of peace, and beyond the method of banking is really what it's getting to. And Cybell seems to be so much in my mind, the idea of even the Southwestern Bell reach out and touch someone, which I mean, for real involved with like, I mean, the baptism. I mean, I'm so not like thinking anything about it in any kind of way as anything other than what I'm really talking about. It seems that the Oracle Corporation presenting Cybell had led to the Arabic, ultimately, world news and national news involving, Al-Qaeda in the Persian Gulf, ultimately even OPEC, and Cybell is the thing linking, United States Supreme Court Southwest Court reporter ultimately even the word de facto involving General Motors in Detroit. I mean, even the President Paul Volcker in the book Sicknesses and Temple of, the New York Federal Reserve Bank, Paul Volcker, and being called by Ronald Reagan into Washington, D.C. I think he had 2 positions as an economic advisor and a Secretary of Treasury. And Robert E. Rubin, in practical application of the United States Secretary of Treasury, his involvement with Citigroup in Detroit is presenting the thing about de facto and something other than what would be the normal perception of like loss prevention and suppression as monetary and domestic. But Robert E. Rubin, his name, the way it's spelled and pronounced, is like and or including the thought of like the tribe of Reuben being the tribe of scribes, and ultimately, using the stars, for navigation. And the thing with this is that it's automatically isometrics and beyond maritime law immediately in a split second. I mean, just that simple, that way of biblical terminology, using the stars for navigation. Although many people thought of navigation as automatically, like the Navy in maritime law, in bibliography, it's not really that at all. It's like making a great beyond internet protocol of a local area network of like maritime law. And that's the thing about, J. Edgar Hoover being amphibious, the Hoover and the hovercraft. And the thing about the walk, the jaywalk is not a jaywalk. And being amphibious, even the Luke Skywalker thing about it, but not what I'm really thinking about right now. But anyway, it's already going on. God, close to an hour. Yeah, so it seemed to be the Cybell in Arabic, identifying the Persian Gulf and the Nile and Euphrates, that has that half cycle above the letter N applied to the acronym OSHA, of, the idea of like a star is born, like a new high-rise building. It's kind of like I feel like being a superstar, okay? I mean, for real, okay? Okay, I'm a drummer, okay? And not limited to, and I like singing, yeah, why not? The thing with this is that, a tower of power, like Vision's tower of power, yeah, would, at least, a 75-floor Vision tower high-rise building, yeah, and like 3, 25-floor Vision's tower high-rise buildings, to actually, have some idea of like actual participation of like some presidential, executive, way of living somewhere like other than a commercial venue of living quarters. But likewise, in addition, all aviation about like a HX-50 helicopter and like a hangar with like 2 horizontally propelled aircraft landing pads. It's motorized retraction in and out the hangar without having to, worry about, some expert, hovering in and out of it. So like anyway, so like it's like it seemed to be like going on, because it seemed to be that having a commercial venue of living quarters not affected by television programming, and now it seems to be an issue like Cybell and knowing what Oracle is ultimately gets to is like enterprise management, and whether it's free enterprise or the thought of like human capital, and what enterprise management is as compared to database administration. Enterprise management as compared to Cybell, just like, firmware, middleware, and database administration is the 3, big deal about Oracle. And the thing with this is that, I'm actually trying to place if I really can remember if Cybell is middleware, or if there's some idea of like center line of oscillation at a 90-degree presenting the circle with a dot, and automatically some thought of like the Eurodollar in my mind, or Diners Club, and Alphamex 107, and military and quantum. Cybell involving the Oracle Corporation is automatically, in my mind, based upon my experience of a Flag Day, June 14th, 1992 baptism at the Mormon Church in Friendswood, Texas, the Alphamex of Galveston County, 213 in Chevrolet, Silverado Z71 in Pearland, a bunch of telepathic brainwaves, in my mind automatically, including like Chevrolet IROC Z28, and it seemed to be the thing about the rectangle, about the IROC, and even the spore stone used in orthopedic surgery and the humerus bone, seemed to be, the thing about the Chevrolet IROC Z28, and, even the high-rise thing, about an IROC and not limited to, but it seemed to be the spore stone involving orthopedic surgery in my situation, like really right now, about, some idea of, like, for instance, my humerus bone being actually removed on. I didn't know it had been operated on, and realized that, and find it so hard to believe. How could that happen to me, not know it? In any case, so, like, all these things are going on, and I see that something beyond the neighborhood is really my direction and intent, and having, it's kind of like, using YouTube.com on my channel, WadeASVPriddy, P-R-D-D-Y, at YouTube.com, and, really getting some brains about, what having the right to assemble means at that level, hey, yeah, and I'm, like, really trying to, like, really stay calm about getting it, like, going, and, like, getting it, like, a whole bunch of stuff, like, on Highway 288 and various places around the United States, and I don't know about all that counterbalancing the earth for perfected seasonal changes. At one point, I mean, this is, like, been going on for quite some time, many years. I've spent a lot of time, many decades, like, involving linguistic and alphanumeric, and it's a practical application of principle and the compatibility, which seems to be the biggest deal about, computer programming and language embedding and encryption. But, it's like, this is where I'm really at right now, and it seems to be the significance of, like, even the baptism of, like, Southwestern Bell reach out and touch someone, and it seems to be, like, just now, in my mind, involving even the practical application involving the Persian Gulf of Cybell, and even the thought of the Nile and Euphrates in the alphanumeric 73 Harris, Egypt, and Israeli, and all this information seems to be, I mean, like, what it is like right now. So, like, I'm really thinking about it, and it's already going on an hour and 1 minute and, like, 30, I think, now it's 39 seconds. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and take a break, because I'm actually really, like, wanting, like, Vision's Tower, a power high-rise building, like in Pearland, and, like, yeah, for real. And might as well, thinking about Wade Bank International, Arians kinds of that, and, like, annuities. Yeah, and a whole bunch of stuff about the Airmark Arena, maximum seating capacity of 26,000, an indoor entertainment venue on Highway 288. And even Transept Horizon Yacht Manufacturing, and distribution, and Transept Horizon, like, a record company for, like, audio and music video and concert touring and promotion sales and all that stuff about, Transept Horizon in my mind is so much in my mind about what I'm talking about, like, right now. It seemed to be, like, the perfect name for, a serious, like, audio production record company, as well as, like, Higher Angels is my thing about, really, about what I am is trying to be, the thought of, like, something other than, see, in my mind, Higher Angels is automatically, like, light scribe isometrics, and involving, something beyond the Bureau of Vital Statistics or carbon footprints and absentee voting of a footprint. Ultimately, the thought of that, even using a carbon footprint as biometrics of a birth certificate, and going beyond, the biometrics into a whole bunch of white stuff of, like, invisible programming and light scribe, and the thought of the laser, and and I refer to the coupon and Milvax as current residence for LASIK laser corrective eye surgery, and it seemed to be so Mercedes, and the laser that really placed, from, like, 1979 to the year 2022, and it was a combination of, like, many factors, including a laser at the first time I had no idea was even involved. The second time I knew without a doubt that long between 1979 to the year 2022, for the first time, all the connectivity became a point of origin, ultimately leading to the prefix of the White House 4, 5, and 6 in the coupon in my mailbox of, like, LASIK laser corrective eye surgery, the white hair, blue eyes, person in it, and yeah, for real. So, like, yeah, that's really good. So, like, anyway, so, like, I was kind of, like, thinking about that, because it seemed to be the thing about quite a bit in a whole different perspective. Yeah, in that way. So, like, that's really good. So, like, anyway, so, like, I'm gonna go ahead and take a break, because yeah, so, like, I gotta group my mind about, Oracle Cybell, but it seemed to be, in my mind, automatically the United States Supreme Court Southwest Court Reporter. The thing about, Southwestern Bell being, known as Southwestern Bell, the thing about is that reach out and touch someone was the thing. That was so my baptism. have to reach out and touch someone, and like ultimately, you know, an experience, ultimately some telepathic mediation in the sky, and a whole bunch of information now seem to be even, what seem to be potentially maybe even the thought of the Persian Gulf and Cybell and the Oracle Corporation that way, but it seemed to be the AOL, America Online, and Apple and Oracle that way, and the Orion and Arian issue, it seemed to be like one Justice Park between the alphanumerics of 34, or like just the principle of the symbolic representation on the backside, and just a difference of 1 at a 90 degree, and then from that point, like exponential quotients of powers of multiplication, you know, something beyond in quantum and phenomenally huge ratio. But the thing with this is that it seemed to be the thing about, you know, Cybell and Southwestern Bell. I mean, the baptism on Flag Day, June 14th, 1992, and all the information that you can hear me like and see me talking on youtube.com at WadeASVPriddy, P-R-D-D-Y. And the thing about Cybell, it seems in pronunciation, it presents, you know, Oracle and what they're really about as far as like database administration, middleware and firmware, and, you know, the difference between Apple and Oracle, and what seemed to be the alignment on the wall, ultimately a telepathic blueprint on the wall, and Orion performance monitoring of the song Fifth Dimension, Up in the Air in a Beautiful Balloon, and ultimately the nanoluminance and the pastels, and all that. But anyway, it's like, I need to take a break, okay? But anyway, there it is, okay?